I listened to an interview the other day where someone said that. Well, didn't Jesus' early followers just think he was a man and Constantine made him God later because he was good for his political purposes? The deity of Jesus, invented in the 4th century. Let me show you a picture. This is P66. This is P66. Papyrus 66. That's John's first chapter. This document, this papyrus, is from the 2nd century, so AD 200. Almost the entirety of John in that document. So read along with me if you will. This is from 200 AD. 150 years before, 125 before the Council of Nicaea. We're about to see how much Constantine changed the deity of Jesus. Let me read it to you. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I'll skip a few. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. Glory as the only Son of the Father, full of grace and truth. 125 years before Constantine, the church was saying, you know who that man was? He was God. What you have here is what they wrote then, and who he was then is who he is now. And so when Bart Ehrman released the paperback of Misquoting Jesus, he put in the appendix, and I quote, "Essential Christian belief is not affected by textual variant in the manuscript tradition of the New Testament." Thank you for putting that in the appendix of the paperback. And yet some of you aren't satisfied because you're like, what about the Old Testament, Ben? The oldest copy of the Hebrew Bible we have is that there's 3. And so for years, they were built off the Masoretic text. The Masoretes lived in about AD 500 in the Qumran Dead Sea area, and they would copy the Old Testament. And so we have 3 of their copies. We have the Cairo Codex from AD 896, we've got the Aleppo Codex, and the Leningrad Codex, all from around that same time of the 10th century, around 900 AD. And for years, they were our oldest copies, right? The oldest copies we had of the Old Testament was 900 years after the life of Jesus. And then in the 1940s, some Bedouin goat herders were out in the Dead Sea area, which is below sea level, very salty area, and a little boy was throwing rocks into caves, and as he was throwing rocks into a cave, he heard a crashing sound. So he went in to that cave the next day and found these clay pots, and in them were these little wrappings of scrolls. And so they took one to an antiquities dealer and sold it to him, and then he tried to sell it to a monastery, and that monastery was like, wait, I think there's something to this. They began to involve some Old Testament scholars, and they realized what this guy brought us is the book of Isaiah from the Old Testament. And so they began to involve multiple scholars and began to evaluate what is this we're dealing with here. And in February 1948, they sent it to William Albright. William Albright's a scholar at Johns Hopkins University, and he was the leading paleographer in the world at the time. And in March, he wrote back, "My heartiest congratulations on the greatest manuscript discovery of modern times. The date should not be later than the ascension of Herod the Great. I should prefer a time around 100 BC. And as they uncovered the Dead Sea Scrolls that you know of, these tender documents were somehow stored below sea level, and it preserved the entire Old Testament, except the book of Esther. So fascinating thing happened. If you're playing along, class, here, can you come here for a second? Suddenly we got a copy of the Old Testament from 100 years before Jesus. Before, we were just 900 years after Jesus. Now we're 100 years before Jesus looking at the Old Testament. We're about to play the telephone game, class, and find out how much this changed over time. Let me read one scholar, R. Laird Harris. Thank y'all for standing up here, by the way. As he talked about this text, the text is extremely close to our Masoretic text. A comparison of Isaiah 53 shows that only 17 letters were different. Over 1,000 years of the telephone game. 10 of these are differences in spelling, like our honor or honor with a U, and produce no change in the meaning at all. 4 more are very minor differences, such as the presence of a conjunction, which is a matter of style, so that's 14. 3 letters of the Hebrew word light, which is added after they shall see in verse 11. They shall see, or they shall see light. So out of 166 words in this chapter, only this one word is in question, and it does not at all change the sense of the passage. This is typical of the whole manuscript. So one of the only places on the planet this kind of thing can survive, we get it all. And it was preserved through history. Why? Why save it that way? So that we could read Isaiah 53. Who has believed what he's heard from us? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a young plant, like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised and we esteemed him not. But surely he has borne our griefs. He carried our sorrows. We esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted, but he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. All like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord laid on him the iniquity of us all. There's something different about this book, categorically different, miraculously preserved, so that you could hear the message that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. And so 100 years before you could read, when he's coming, he's going to be grieved and stricken, and yet his chastisement's going to bring you peace, and by his wounds you are healed. Why preserve this? The preservation was for invitation, so you would know that God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him would not perish, but have everlasting life. God did this for you. So unlike any ancient document, there's something special about the transmission of this. And you can read the books of Daniel Wallace, you can read the books of Bruce Metzger. Bruce Metzger was the mentor of Bart Ehrman. And he was asked in an interview the same thing that was quoted in the Washington Post. Did you peer into the depths of Christianity and find it to be untrue? And this is what Ehrman's mentor said. They asked him, what did this delving into the minutiae do to your faith? And he said, it increased it. To see the firmness with which these materials have come down to us, the multiplicities of copies, some of which are very ancient. So the interviewer asked, so scholarship has not diluted your faith? He said, no, on the contrary, it built it. I've asked questions all my life. I've dug into this text. I've studied this thoroughly. And today I know with confidence that my trust in Jesus has been well placed, very well placed. So I know some of you are like, well, I still don't know if Jesus was the Son of God and I need to put faith in him. That's okay. You're on a journey. Just keep coming back. Just keep coming back. We're going to talk about him every week. It's the only thing we're selling around here. But I don't want you to believe the lie that you can't know what he was like. And I don't want you to believe the lie that you can't know his words, because they've been preserved throughout history for you and for me. Not to save a book, but to save you. This preservation was for salvation, because God loves you and he wants you to know what he has done for you.